Hey there, Nick Tunitakis here. In this video, we're going to go over replacing a Makefile with a custom shell script, specifically for use cases where you might be using a Makefile as a glorified aliases file for a specific project. This is something I do all the time. For example, when it comes to building a lot of applications, you might have some really long, tedious commands that you have to type pretty frequently. It's really awesome to wrap those things up into a make task or a shell script just to make it easier to type. Likewise, if you want to invoke a couple of commands at once, then using the Makefile or equivalent is very nice because, running one command is a lot nicer than running 4 commands or something like that. Now, if you happen to be a C developer, then chances are you won't want to make this change over to a shell script because Make does have some built-in functionality to make compiling dependencies a lot more efficient because it can figure out what it needs to compile based on files changing and whatnot. But in this video, we are going to focus on the use case of basically using make as a glorified aliases file. Now, this project that we're looking at here is a Dockerized Flask example, and it is available up here on GitHub. I'll leave a link to this one in the description. If you're not a Flask developer, it doesn't really matter. We're not going to go over any Flask code, but this run script here, which is what we're going to be covering in this video, is available in this Git repo. Also, there is another file here, this Makefile, that's not in the Git repo. I'll throw this one up into a gist because this is kind of a throwaway file for the sake of the video. I figured before we get into this run script, it might be a good idea just to go over the very basics of make, because now we can understand why I decided to not use make and instead use a custom shell script. So this is a very basic Makefile. Let me just open up another terminal window here so we can start running some commands. And again, we're not going to go over this stuff in super detail, but the basic idea is, you can run make like this. And, due to this help menu that I have selected up here, it's going to output things like all the available commands we can run, as well as some documentation based on the names of the commands, as well as the comments here. This script just parses all that stuff out. Pretty useful. That's something I found on Stack Overflow a while ago, modified it a little bit, and I've been using it ever since. But here's what I mean by creating project-specific aliases, right? Wouldn't it be cool if I can just type in something like make db reset here and just have this command get executed, which under the hood, this is the db reset command. It is going to run this command for us, right? This long docker compose exec command. And by the way, in this other terminal here, I do have a Docker Compose up running. But if you're not familiar with Docker, it's not an issue. Not going to need to know about this video. But understand that running the db reset command, this is a really long command to type. If I want to reset my database, I don't want to have to type Docker Compose exec web flask db reset with testdb. I just want to run make db reset. Done. That is super convenient. And I'm sure, if you pause for a second and think about use cases in your own project, you can probably think of 20 different things where just having these little aliases helps a lot. And actually, the run script that we're going to look at has many, many examples there. But this one, kind of just a throwaway file for the sake of the video. But, you can see here too, I can run make routes and it's going to go and run this command instead. And that is very handy. And, there's some other examples here too, which we're going to get to, but if you're brand new to using make, I guess maybe it's worth spending a minute or two or, 30 seconds to go over what the heck is this PHONY thing? Now, I'm actually not a Makefile professional here, right? I've read their docs a little bit, basically, cobbled together some examples and worked on them for years, and this is kind of where it is. But when it comes to using this PHONY thing, if you don't use PHONY, then I'm going to run this task here, what is PHONY? Notice how make will just be yo, what is PHONY is up to date. And that's because in this directory, I do have a file called what is PHONY. So one use case of using PHONY is, I guess, is one, according to the docs, it makes make more efficient. I guess it can just maybe find the task faster. I'm not really sure on the implementation details. But, I guess adding PHONY just says run this task here instead of actually looking for this file on disk. Again, I don't know if that's 100%, but, that's basically what I got out of this, right? So if I can run this again, now it actually says, well, did I not save anything? This will not, oh yeah, no, duh, we're getting the expected output, right? Now it's actually echoing this command here. And this is another interesting characteristic of make. So if I actually, because you might be wondering why put the @ symbol there? So if I don't put the @ symbol there and I rerun this, then it actually is literally going to echo this command. And then it is going to, give us the output of what that command is. And we actually saw an example of that before when I ran a make db reset. Notice how it literally echoed the Docker Compose exec command here, and there's no other output because this db reset doesn't produce any output. But if I actually put an @ symbol in front of that and reran make db reset, then it's going to output nothing, right? Because we're just saying don't literally output this command, instead just run the command, and then if it happens to have output, then produce it here. And again, these are very subtle small things. I didn't switch to using shell scripts because of this behavior. It's really not a big deal just to remember to put PHONY there, and also just, have a heads up about the @ symbol and how that works. The real reason is basically this. So if we take a look at this make command here, right, it's a Flask command. And notice how these other commands here, like the db reset and routes, they both call this Flask command with different arguments, right? One time we're doing a db reset, the other time we're doing a routes. And if you're familiar with writing shell scripts, you might think like, well, maybe this args thing does something cool where I can just run something like, a make Flask routes like that, and like whatever arguments I pass in, they'll just be passed in automatically and life would be amazing. But if you try to do that, notice here routes is not even a part of the command, and it just ran like nothing essentially, right? Well, actually, it's a little bit more involved than that. Like the output of this command, actually, let me make this a little bit bigger by zooming in just so we can see more at once. So I ran this make Flask routes command. This is actually just outputting docker compose exec web Flask. It's like it didn't even see the routes argument at all. And then what we're seeing here is the output of Flask's help menu. So if you just happen to run Flask with no arguments at all, this is the help menu you're going to get. But then right after that, it actually went and ran this other make task, which is Flask routes, and then we see the output of that. Like, to me, this behavior is, it's standard, I guess, if you're used to working with make, but it's not how I wanted to use the script, right? I'm not saying what I want to do is correct. I'm just saying like, here's how I want to use the script, and it doesn't work this way. But with make, you can do like this, right? You can just say, supply a variable named args, and technically you can name this args anything that you want. It just needs to match up in both spots, right? In the code and on the command line. And now if I run a make Flask routes like this, then we just see that it passed in the routes variable, no problem. Everything is great, everything works good. There's actually a second way you can do this as well. So you can run it like this instead. But you kind of see where I'm getting at here. Like, this is super inconvenient to write like arguments like this or like this. Like, both of them are very, they're not fun to type, right? Like, I just want to run them as if they're just regular commands on my command line. And, you can also do other things too, right? Like, you can do like a -- help, and that's going to run Flask's help menu. But yeah, putting all these things together, like if you're just using a Makefile as an aliases file, like, why not just make it a shell script? Because then you can get all the advantages of a shell script. So let me just open up a run script here. And then I'll just run this very quickly. And this script we're going to go over in a little bit more detail. So, like the Makefile, there's an automated help menu for this one. You can just run, and it's going to output all of these tasks here. They're even numbered, which, by the way, will be very easy to disable the numbering if you don't want them. But what's kind of neat about this run script is it is just a shell script in the end. It does look immediately more complicated than the Makefile because there's a lot of things being done in the script that is not available in the Makefile, specifically around like setting TTY settings with Docker Compose so it works in CI, but we're not going to get into that stuff in this video. That's not super duper important. But here's the takeaway here that's really cool about using a shell script. Now, you might be wondering like, well, if you add all of these functions here like this, like maybe there's like, 100 lines of shell scripting on the bottom that kind of like parses all the arguments and all that stuff. And the answer to that is like, no, there's like really just one line of code that basically says any function that you define in this file will end up being a command that you can run unless you prefix a function name with any identifier that you want. In my case, I actually hard-coded an underscore, so which we'll see here. But this becomes really cool because one, in my opinion, let me open up the Makefile side by side too, just so we can see here. What am I doing? Makefile in the side. There we go. So, if you actually look at some of these commands like side by side, right? Like the shell script isn't more boilerplate, really. We don't need the PHONY line. Instead, we just basically define a function. Then we still have our one-liner of documentation, right? I just put it on a different line here because, it doesn't need to be on this one line here due to like this code parsing it, right? And then, you can pass in whatever command that you'd like. But since we're using a shell script, we can actually just pass in $@, which is going to pass in all the arguments that we pass in from the command line over to this function, which is then going to call this function, passing in all of those arguments as well. So we actually get the behavior that we would like. So in this case, like there's a function called Flask here. So I can just run like, well, I guess using help is maybe not the best example here because like literally running with no arguments or the -- help gives the same output. But we can see that, I can maybe run like a Flask secrets instead, right? This is a Flask extension I wrote that just outputs a whole bunch of secret keys that you can use for like database passwords and all that stuff. But notice how, I can just, and this is the function executing all the time. By the way, there's not a custom like secrets function here somewhere. I can arbitrarily type in any arguments that I want. And to me, that is a massive win. It's a massive, massive victory. Now, in some cases, you might be thinking like, well, with the Makefile, it's kind of nice to have everything be predefined. Like, exactly where you're getting when you run a specific task. Like, you can't just arbitrarily run stuff. And there are some benefits to that. And you can do the same thing here as well. Like, you don't have to always pass in all the arguments, right? You can make more specific tasks here. Let me also just close this Makefile. Like, let me give an example here from one of them. Yeah, like pip install, like this one, it just happens to run like a pip install script in a bin folder here. There's no arguments being passed in. Or, even better, like this one here, like I can just run pip3 outdated, right? And it's going to show me all the packages for this project that happen to be out of date based on what I have installed. This command also takes like, 5 or 6 seconds to run, but it just checked at all of my dependencies and was like, hey, by the way, you have 1.54 installed, but 1.55 is available. But again, I just ran this one command here. And by the way, just a heads up, when you're working with shell scripts, you actually can namespace your functions, or you can name them with a colon if you like. So here I have like a couple of different pip commands, like install and outdated. Likewise with yarn, I have install and outdated. So that's kind of like a really cool way to, I guess, namespace your commands, because, this looks pretty nice to type. But now let's get into, I guess, well, before we get into that, let me just explain like these abstractions, right? Because since we're dealing with a shell script, we have the capabilities to do basically with whatever we want, right? Whatever is possible with Bash. So a lot of these commands are really just executing like a Docker compose exec. Like again, like I extracted this out to a variable because you can technically pass in like exec or run, and then there's the TTY stuff, but ignore this stuff for now, right? Because this is essentially just saying, in most cases, that I just want to do Docker compose exec, and then I want to run the web container with whatever arguments that you pass in, right? So this happens to be a private function. So if I run like this, and zoom in here, notice here, there's no functions here that start with underscore because I just have them being filtered out. But you can see here, like this command one, it's like a general purpose command. So I can run like run cmd, and then, I don't know, like maybe you just want to run env command like inside the container, and it's going to pop out, all the environment variables here. This command allows you to do that because, again, you can just pass in anything, but you can see how it is using this underscore DC function here, right? Which is doing the Docker compose exec. And then it's like, okay, cool, I want that to happen on the web container, and then run whatever arguments that you'd like. And then these other commands like the flask one, the flake8 one, and the pytest one, they all just use this one cmd function because it's still the same deal. It's like it's still running Docker compose exec web, and then flask, and then whatever you pass in. So why not use the power of programming here just to make that abstraction? I mean, technically you can do that with the Makefile too, but again, this is like meant to be the production ready file. The Makefile was just thrown together for the sake of simplicity. But that's the basic pattern here that I'm using all across this file. I just have functions defined. This one uses the DC private DC function specifically because it's running in a different container instead of web. Like I can just run psql here and just drop straight into a psql prompt where I can take a look at my databases, or database tables, I should say, and do whatever you need to do. And these are things that I think are really super useful in any web application, right? It's not specific to Flask. Like if you want to connect to Redis or install your dependencies using whatever dependency manager that you have. And then, if you want to go over some more examples here, right? Like running your test suite, running a linter, running basic like Flask commands or Rails commands, or, manage commands if you happen to be using Django, right? These are all very nice things to have, as well as like going into a bash prompt, or let's see what else is in here. Yeah, like a clean one that just basically all dot directories that can be safely deleted, they get deleted. And then, it can even go as far like there's no limit to this, right? Maybe you can put some shell scripting in here for CI environments, right? So if you're using something like GitHub Actions or GitLab or Jenkins or some other CI provider, you can just have most of your logic sitting here in a very simple shell script. And then if you open up your CI script itself, like this is GitHub Actions, by the way. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here, but here's the basic idea. Like this script is super, super basic. Like there's a very, very few specific things for GitHub Actions, but then it's like, well, installing dependencies, cool, I just run the shell script. And then testing, cool, I just run that script. And suddenly like I can do all this stuff offline on my own machine if GitHub Actions is down, and I can still deploy my application. But again, this is just the benefits of maybe creating specific aliases for a project, not so much this run script. Now, how was this help file determined here? Well, there's a function called help. And by default, if nothing is passed in, it actually runs this function. This is actually pretty interesting. And by the way, so this is like the cool part of the script. There are no fancy like argument parsing that needs to be done. This actually came from a pattern that I found on this one Git repo here up on GitHub. So let's check it out here. It's actually no code here. It's just documentation, right? It basically goes over this idea of like, maybe you can replace a Makefile with a Taskfile. And, you set it up like this, like there's his functions there. And then let me make this a little bit bigger. Then there's some stuff we'll go over in a second here in Vim. But yeah, it's like a really cool pattern, right? And he also goes as far as saying like, wouldn't it be nice to create an alias? Like if you're wondering like, how the heck did I just run like this run script, but just by running run like this? Because typically you would need to run a shell script in the current directory like this. That is because I do have an alias set up. So let me just show you that really fast here. I'm going to go to my aliases file, set file type equals shell. I should probably put that at the top of the file. Where is this thing at? Yeah. So all I did here was I created one simple alias that just says, hey, when you run, just do a /run instead. But if you go back to his Git repo, like he actually has it named as a task file. That's fine. Like I decided to just name mine a run file because I kind of like having the alias name and the file name be the same, but essentially the same thing. But yeah, this was a pretty cool, there's really nothing to read here. These are just examples of like what you can do, but very cool idea. I really like it. And in his repo, he didn't really go over how to do extra things like, create the idea of a private function. So what I ended up doing was I opened up an issue because I had to figure out this pattern sort of on my own here. Like I wasn't sure how to make private functions. And, I kind of explained the use case of what I would want to do. And then eventually, like 5 minutes after I opened the issue, I thought about it a little bit and broke down the help menu and figured out like, hey, we can just like, grep out what we don't want, and then suddenly that just hides it from the list, which is definitely good enough in this case. But, going back to this help menu, this is kind of neat. Like I never knew about any of these things like compgen before. So let me paste this in here just to show you an idea of like what this actually even does, right? So like, let's just replace, the grep and the cat part and just like output compgen-a function. So if I run the run script there, you can see that it just outputs a list of all the functions in the file. So this is a really cool little command line utility I never knew existed. So, but you can see here, it grabs the ones with the underscore as well as all of them. And then it also just alphabetizes them, which is kind of nice because honestly, if I were writing my own help menu, I would like to see them alphabetized as well because it just makes it easy to figure that stuff out. But, going back to this function over here, let me just uncomment this one and we'll get rid of the cat there at the end, just to show you like how this command is being built up, right? So if I run the run one again, notice how that there are no underscores, right? Because now we're just saying we're grepping out commands or functions, I guess, that start with an underscore. And then we're doing -v, which gives you basically the reverse with grep, right? Like instead of getting all the functions that start with an underscore, it gets all the ones that don't. And that's exactly what we want. And then finally, over here at the end, we do, let me, if I can save the file, we do the cat n there. And if we run that one, then we get this nice spacing here with the numbered commands. And, honestly, at the beginning, I thought like, maybe I don't like the numbers at all. Is there a way to like maybe get rid of them? And it turns out you can, but you just can't use cat. So that's also another thing that I learned about cat, which I didn't know. If you do a -n, it actually will just number the outputs there and it makes all the spacing and it looks pretty nice. But let's say that you don't want the numbers, but you still want them to have pretty good spacing, right? Because if I go here and comment that out and rerun this, suddenly this looks a little bit ugly, right? We have tasks here and like all the commands are sort of just like pushed to the left. Like I like the indentation a lot. I feel like it just makes it way more readable. And then also, by the way, we have the time on the bottom. We'll get to that in a second. But if you didn't want the numbers, you can just use sed here. And, I always get mixed up on this one. So let's see if this works. So the idea is what we want to do is at the very start, well, basically what we want to do is replace this output, but essentially replace the beginning of the output with 2 spaces. So we can just say at the beginning of the line or the output of whatever, we just say, okay, let's just add 2 spaces there. Well, I don't need that. And I guess we'll do it globally, even though technically I guess it wouldn't matter. So, but there we go, right? We can see now that, yeah, I don't think the global matters. I don't know. Does that even work? These are things I usually Google. But yeah, you can see, right, tasks and then indent. So you are in total full control. If you wanted, this many spaces instead of 2, then you can just rerun it and there you go. You have all the spaces that you want, which is pretty cool. But like I said before, the numbered ones are kind of growing on me. So that's the pattern that I decided to pick. Because I can know, well, I mean, I guess this isn't really like a super useful use case, but if you had a lot of commands, like 45 commands, and you were talking to a coworker or something like that, maybe you can just be like, hey, I'm having issues running command 42 or something, you know? But I guess that really wouldn't come up, but whatever. I still like the numbers. But then, you know, at the end here, we just print out just saying like, hey, there's some extended help, right? Because each task, the pattern that I go with at least is at the start of the function, I just add a comment there. Technically, they don't need to have the double pound symbols. I think that's because I actually copied them from a Makefile, converting it over to a run script. So by the time that you watch that, I actually will probably patch that and push it up to the repo just to have 1 pound symbol like that instead of 2. But yeah, going back down to the bottom of the file, this is where things get kind of interesting because this pattern also is pretty neat. And again, like I sort of just learned this stuff on the fly, right? So every single command that we run here, if I run like a make bash here, which is going to put us into a bash prompt inside the container. Let's just let this run for a couple of seconds here, and then I'll just control D that. But we can actually see that, you know, we were connected to that container for, you know, 6.5 seconds basically. And that's thanks to the time command here. And then also, you know, we're just saying when we format the time, this is just like an environment variable that you can configure when working with the time command. We just say, hey, the task completed in, and then some crazy formatting, right? This is taken straight from that Taskfile documentation. Not going to bother breaking this one down because I'm sure it's in the man pages for time. But the idea here is, you know, if there's no command passed in at all to time, then we are going to use help. Now, I don't know how time works exactly, because one thing I thought to myself was like, well, what if I didn't want to report the time of the commands? Like, how could you actually execute these functions? And after a little bit of experimentation, I figured out that you can actually just do something like this. Like, I'm not going to bother putting the default help menu, but if you just eval whatever you pass in, like run bash, then that actually does that, because, you know, it's evaluating what? Bash. Okay, so bash becomes that argument there. And then what is bash? Well, bash is just a function in this file up here somewhere, right? There it is. So you're just evaling, basically dynamically calling a function by passing it in as an argument. Now, I don't know if time uses eval, but, you know, that is, and if, I guess if you wanted to make this production ready, whatever, you know, if you wanted to use this all the time, like you would do that, right? Just so you can run without any arguments, and it would work exactly the same as time, and then you can get rid of all the time stuff. But personally, I like the time because it's kind of neat to know how long commands took. But yeah, I mean, whether or not if using eval is the best move here, maybe there's a better way to do that one. I'm not 100% sure. Personally, I just use the time format like this, and it's all good. But I mean, this is basically, you know, the TLDR, right, on creating an aliases file for your specific project. Now, if you have any comments below, please let me know. I'll do my best to answer all of them. Also, it would be kind of neat to know, like, what type of tasks are you putting in your run file if you decide to use it, you know, and what web framework you happen to be using, or, you know, whatever application that you're building. Also, just as a reminder, you know, this script here that we just looked at is available on GitHub, so feel free to copy paste it from here. Yeah, with that said, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up because it helps a lot. And on that note, I will see you in the next video. Thanks again for watching.